Now, one of the considerations often in a deployment is how are your buttons, panic buttons, going to communicate with the network, right? We call it the backhaul. In wireless terminology, that's called the backhaul. Typically, a lot of people use Wi-Fi or cellular, or sometimes people use Bluetooth. Now, each of these things have advantages and disadvantages. So with Wi-Fi, you might think, okay, I already have Wi-Fi in the building, so it's great that they're able to reuse it. But that's actually not quite true, because in order to use Wi-Fi, use your Wi-Fi, people have to know your username and password, so they have to program that into the buttons. So that's a bit of a problem, because you have to do it individually, one button at a time. And if you happen to change the password, well, there's a whole other challenge that you have to solve. But on top of that, the buttons are going to be sitting on your Wi-Fi all the time, so it will take away from some of the bandwidth that your guests might need. Now, with cellular, you have two issues. One is that cellular coverage is not always ubiquitous in hotels. Like, there'll be nooks and crannies, that like stairwells and places like that, where cellular is not going to penetrate. And if you're a smaller property, you really can't invest in adding picocells and so on in order to improve the coverage. So you're stuck with blind spots. One of the things that Jeff mentioned earlier. And then with cellular, there's always an added cost too, because you've got to pay a monthly fee to whether it's AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever it is, right? It's not free. Finally, there's Bluetooth, and Bluetooth is, again, it's fairly cheap technology, but the challenge with Bluetooth is that its range, its coverage is pretty small compared to Wi-Fi or with cellular. So you end up having to install a large amount of infrastructure nodes. In fact, some of the folks who use this have to install an access point, looks like a Wi-Fi access point, about the same size, in every single room. So that is actually a very expensive solution, and also not very good if you want to cover between buildings, right? If your property is a bit larger, if you have 2 or 3 buildings and you want to have coverage when people are moving between buildings, Bluetooth is not very good for that. So what we chose to do was to use this technology called LoRa, which stands for long range, and it's a standards-based technology. It operates in the 900 megahertz band. And what does that mean for the general user? It just means that its coverage is really good. It has in open space, that is when you're not inside buildings, it can cover up to 10-kilometer range. So as you can imagine, that's really good for outdoor coverage when you're between buildings and so on. Indoors, we still get really good coverage and penetration. It eliminates blind spots, because that's just the way, when you're at that lower frequency, 900 megahertz, that's just the way the wireless signals travel. And we find that we are able to cover 2 to 3 floors with a single access point. Unlike, let's say, with Bluetooth, where you might need an access point per room, right? So if you have 50 rooms on a floor, you're putting in 50 access points per floor. So the choice of LoRa gives us the principle of minimal infrastructure, right? So we can put fewer access points and a maximum coverage without really increasing your cost, because this is an open source technology and a number of people make the devices. So there's a lot of market pressures to lower the cost. And it's an unlicensed technology, so there is no extra licensing cost like there is with cellular. So that's kind of our thoughts around network infrastructure.